to welcome everybody and thank you for joining. And to introduce to you our panel this evening, I'll start with the one who's in frame, my mother, Kyle Oconti, who directed the production. And to my left, we have Travis Carlson. Go ahead and wave, Travis, if folks
Hi.
don't know you or haven't seen you. This is Travis Carlson. He is the name and the man and the myth and the legend behind Pan American Film Division and the creative force along with his trusty team. And he was the leading force behind our collaboration with Pan American Film Division, putting the play on screen. And then to my right is Greg Natali, who wears so many hats at Irish Classical, associate director. He is our production manager. He is our facilities manager. And for this, he was our assistant director and also our producer. So welcome to the three of you. Also on screen tonight, we have Cassie Cameron. Go ahead and wave, Cassie. You might recognize her from her award-winning turns on stage in Golden Boy and Night Alive, but she is also now our director of development at Irish Classical, and she is the lady behind the scenes helping out with our chat box this evening as well. So welcome everybody. We've got a great group this evening. If you can start thinking of some questions, or maybe you have some questions prepared, great. If something comes to mind, go ahead and throw it into the chat box and Cassie will send it over my way and we will read it live on the air. If somebody you know would maybe like to join us this evening, go ahead and shoot them the link and they can join us. The link was in your eBlast and also on Facebook. So now that all that's out of the way, let's get going with our talk back. We'll be here until about 8 o'clock. So I have a question for the group just to start us off. This was our second turn of putting a play on film. The first one was C Marks, and thanks to all of you who were able to check it out back in the fall. And my question for you is, how did the Year of Magical Thinking differ? This is more for Travis and Greg, and then we'll move to some other questions. Go ahead, either of you.
You want to start, Greg?
Sure. As the producer, it was incredibly different. The first time we were building everything from scratch, and I had not even met Travis yet. So we had to interview a lot of production companies from around Buffalo, and his came highly recommended from a few friends of mine. So that's why Pan American Film Division was included in those original folks we were reaching out to. And after that process, then we had to have the director talk to the finalists, and the whole process took a lot more time to get up and rolling. And it was a very different kind of a film process. Even though it was still a play, it was much more like shooting a film versus what we wound up doing for A Year of Magical Thinking, which wound up becoming more of a ballet in ways, because everything had to be choreographed ahead of time with the single actor doing a one-woman play. And then Travis came to 2 weeks of rehearsal, I think, Travis, easily 2 weeks, and started filming very early on. Whereas the first time we basically came in and we shot it like a movie with certain amounts of shot lists, and it was a lot more hectic. And it wasn't that it wasn't thought out, it was just more film-like, at least in my experience of making movies and TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, my 2 cents on that is reiterating what Greg said, but most film productions would spend a lot of time in editing, and with C Marks we certainly did that, and we gave ourselves basically a lot of decisions and options for an edit. Thinking that was going to be the best way. And I think for that play it was. And for this one, we decided let's front load a lot of decision making and pre-production and sort of, flip the script. So instead of taking those extra 2 weeks editing, let's spend them in pre-production. And like Greg alluded to, so I was in there pretty early and trying to give Kyle as much of a sense of what the camera language is compared to what one would normally expect they're just, I've said it with C-Marks too, but there's different rules that a viewer at home watching TV feels than a viewer in the third row of a play. They have different expectations. There's different things hold your attention. And when someone looks around the room or doesn't look you right in the eye, it means one thing in a play, and it means a different thing if you make eye contact with the camera or refuse to. So we made a lot of decisions like that up front. And then, and when we started shooting, we had made a complete run of the show in a kind of a rehearsal run where I'd filmed every single second of it, and we had decided and sort of agreed upon the shots that we were going to do. And we were kind of marrying those shots. Like we weren't going to necessarily deviate from them unless something changed all the way through the edit. We just said, this is the way we think this moment of the play is best told for these reasons, and committed to that. So the shoot was sort of just executing a very kind of like specific shot list as opposed to options. Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. We have a question in the chat box here. What made ICTC select such an extremely depressing play? Oh, that is a very good question. So when we were, going back to our pivot of early on of going from live in-person performances to digital productions, going back to C-Marks, it was at the very beginning of kind of wrapping our heads around COVID. This was early on. I mean, June, July was when we were really starting to think about C-Marks or just putting anything on screen. And a lot of it was based on what we could feasibly accomplish in our space. Everybody's been to our space before, most likely has been in our space. And if you haven't, it's in the round and it's very intimate, which is great under normal circumstances. But during COVID, it acts against us in a lot of ways. And so artistically and content-wise, there's lots of things that we look for in a play, but a lot of it was logistics as well, small cast and contained spaces. And so we had that with C-Marks. Only 2 people, and it could really be contained. Even the set changes could be contained in our space. And C-Marks, for those of you who have seen it or haven't, the subject material, it is about isolation, and it does kind of nod to what we had been going through with COVID at that time. They're communicating through letters and both, in their own worlds and trying to communicate through that void, but it also is uplifting and it has a romantic edge to it, and it's lighthearted and fun and humorous. And so after the success of C-Marks, we were looking for a second production that was the other side of the coin, because as we move forward through COVID and moving back into in-person performances, we will always look back at this year as its own season. And so we wanted something that acted as a foil to C-Marks in terms of content, in terms of still sticking within our mission. And one aspect of our mission that the company doesn't produce under as much as other parts of the mission are contemporary plays of exceptional merit. And The Year of Magical Thinking is of course based on Didion's memoir, but it is its own play in its own right. And it really is a modern classic in so many ways. It was produced on Broadway in 2007 with Vanessa Redgrave, and Joan Didion adapted that version for the stage. But understanding and helping and ruminating on grief and loss and moving people through that as a guide is what the play does in so many ways. We thought that maybe it was time in the whole COVID journey, the pandemic journey, that folks may relish in the moment to be able to exhale and experience and release and have a catharsis through watching it. It's very heavy. I don't mean to say that it isn't at all, but perhaps there's moments where it would lead an audience member or a viewer to move through that release. And so we thought that coupled with the fact that it is a one-person show and easily to contain in our space safely, because it's not just the performer, it's the crew, it's the film production team, it's the designers, it's the stage management, it's the producers. Everybody is in that space while the movie is being made. So all of those reasons led us to our decision. Mom, I'll turn it over. Kyle, turn it over to you for a question. Did you and Vicki talk about the kind of more depressing or more intense themes of the play? How were those conversations versus the conversations of the more lighthearted moments?
Yeah, we did. Right from the beginning, the sort of joy for both Vicki and I was that we had a pretty good amount of time to do what's called table work. It's before you're moving around on the stage or thinking about, do I stand, do I sit, do I move, do I do anything? You talk about what the words mean and why am I talking? Basically every actor that launches themselves into a role starts with, why am I talking? Why do I even start telling this story? So we did spend a lot of time talking about it. And because we are living, through this pandemic and grief and loss is closer to all of us, sadly, than it was maybe a year or two ago, we had very sort of in-depth and ultimately very personal conversations about grief and loss that we had experienced, and the tools, like magical thinking is a tool, the tools that we may have used or that other people we know may have used, and we spent a long time talking about that and coming to understand just exactly why is Joan Didion telling this story? Why did she write the book? Why did it then become a play? Why is always the big question. And so yeah, in answer of your question, we did. We ultimately came to believe that that the play, even though the play is titled The Year of Magical Thinking, it encompasses two of Joan Didion's books, and we take this journey with her as this story unfolds, and we came to look at it as guidelines, as a sort of a roadmap for grief. And sadly, we all need that these days. And hopefully it is. Kate used the word catharsis. Hopefully it serves that purpose. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. So just a reminder to, throw your questions into the chat box if you have any. The four of us can talk for hours about things, but we really would love to answer any questions you might have about the production. But in the meantime, I am curious to hear from Travis and Kyle and Greg a little bit about transferring a one-person show to the camera, because that was definitely more challenging, I think, than what we had bargained for, and certainly as it was through CMARC. So would one of you mind shedding light on the tests, the experiments that went on weeks before we even got into filming?
I can talk a little bit to that. I was extraordinarily nervous about doing a one-person show because I felt like the interaction between people, but the relationships, the moments between people when they're acting characters, to me, it brings a life and an energy and a vibrance to whatever's going on, whether it's comic or dramatic. And so it made me worried. And then I read the play, and I was like, oh, this is pretty serious. And so that made me even more nervous. And I was free with that feeling to everyone who was involved in the process. And to my way of thinking was, it felt like it was going to be a little too static and non-moving for me. So then I immediately started talking to Kyle as the director and Travis as the director of photography about, we have to find ways to make the camera move, since the character really isn't going to be moving that much. And we all worked on that. And then there was a moment in time where Kyle had kind of created 3 ways of the character relating to the world and possibly an audience, as though there were an audience in the room. And then we realized through camera testing that Travis was doing that something needed to change with that. And so the process, I think, was ongoing, and maybe we all had different points of view throughout. And eventually we found something that seemed to really work well. And maybe the other two could speak to those points too.
I could say something really quick, which is that I think I was, nervous in a much bigger way than normal as well, until we sort of could figure out the algorithm of it. With something that's a traditional play, there's so many normal, when there's a normal narrative, there's normal techniques and tropes to do to support that thing, almost like it's a little bit more obvious how to do it. And this one didn't have an obvious answer, and that's fine. But at some point we got to a stage where I would consider that it's not a one-woman show, it's a two-person show. It's just the audience is the other person. And I think that helped me find an entry point personally. I'm not going to speak for Kyle, but once it felt like we were on the camera or the audience was on the receiving end of a conversation, it's a two-person play, and it's just we're only seeing one side of it. But I'll leave it there for some.
Interestingly, I think that I did a lot of reading as I was preparing for this production, and I read a lot about the process that Joan Didion and Vanessa Redgrave and David Hare, who was the director of the Broadway production, I read quite a bit about their process. And I think in retrospect, what I was reading was that they went through probably very much the same thing that we went through. Mm-hmm. And at a certain point, for those of you who have read the book or both of the books, and maybe have already viewed the play, in the play, the character directly addresses the audience, and this is where we get that idea that this is two people, that the camera becomes part of the conversation. And Joan Didion herself said in the rehearsal process, she realized at a certain point that it had to be more about them, meaning the audience, than it is about us, meaning the character on stage. And that's why she introduced into the script a lot of what the audience hears in terms of like cautions or warnings. There are countless places in the script where the character says, you don't necessarily want to hear this, but I'm going to tell you, you're not going to believe that this is going to happen, but it's going to happen. And that happens repeatedly. And what that did is it took what was a story, a tale, and it became a conversation. And I think that was a real wise choice, because it opened up that feeling of two-way conversation. And I think those are the moments, just as I think back on our process, those are the moments where as I watch the film, those are the moments where I really feel like Vicki is speaking directly to me, that I could just as easily say, oh yeah, and continue the conversation two ways, because those are truly the moments where it feels like a conversation, where it feels like she's giving guidance, she's giving warning, she's giving like this cautionary tale. It wasn't until we were well on our way that I thought back to those articles, some of them written by Joan Didion herself, talking about the process. And that's exactly what I thought. Oh, they were having the same fears and doubts and concerns that we had naturally, that we had. And I can echo what Greg said and what Travis said. We all felt the same thing. Like, how does this work? How do you make this compelling? How do you make this something that people are going to sit and listen to and watch? We were blessed with a beautiful actor who, did an absolutely fabulous job of making that story her own. It's unlike it's not Joan Didion-esque. It's not Vanessa Redgrave-esque. It really is Vicky Perez-esque. And that's exactly what I wanted, because we're all dealing with grief and because we're all dealing with loss. I wanted, my own personal goal for this was I wanted an actor who could make this her own story, to show the universality of it, to show that we are all, if we have not yet been touched by grief, at some point in our life we will, and that just maybe there's something worth listening to in what this woman is sharing with us.
That's wonderful.
You know, to that point too, that I was just thinking universality as soon as you said it, Kyle. And you and I and Vicky and other people had conversations throughout the rehearsal process, and especially towards the end, when Vicky started to really get into a beautiful groove of being a great storyteller with those words, that I would, having just lost a father 2 years ago, when she would talk about certain things, I would instantly tap into places and hospitals and finding the eye of some poor hapless doctor who I was going to go, have a word with, and how you prep yourself walking in, as she talks about, so you can go do battle with the day. So, as I listened over and over and over, it was like, oh, I know every moment that she's talking about, except for a few that were just specific to her, but there were so many that were in my world of understanding with my own father's illness and death.
Thank you, Greg. I'm going to pause for a second. We've got another question here that I'm going to raise in just a moment, but Mark Davies has joined the call. Mark, go ahead and wave. Hi, Mark. Thanks for joining us. And he is our first assistant camera and also a part of Pan American Film Division, and has been with us for both Year of Magical Thinking and CMARC. So thank you for joining the call, Mark. We appreciate it. Yeah, we've got a question here. How hard was it with no audience to play to, both for actor and crew? Vicky isn't on our call tonight, but she will be on the one next Thursday if you'd like to join that one.
But I can kind of talk a little, if it's okay, I can talk a little bit about that, obviously, because Vicky and I had those conversations, and there were sort of early on, kind of, Travis had dropped in, and sort of we had started talking about where the camera's going to be and everything, and then there were those nights where Travis wasn't there, and I would just sort of run around the space and try to be where I thought Travis was going to be, and I would be the lens. I would so early on, we kind of got into this groove of talk to me, just talk to me. And it became then very conversational. And then, just through the marvelous work that Victoria does, she was able to figure out what that wanted to be as a performer, so that when it was no longer looking at a person, it was looking at a lens. She was able to make that. She was just able to make that happen and make that work. She's incredibly talented and strong performer.
We've got another question about kind of along these lines as well. As the text becomes a two-way conversation via breaking the fourth wall, the camera rather than audience in this example, how is the actor able to receive stimulation in return? Without Vicky on the call, Mama, passed over to you. Is it a lot about talking about the journey of the piece and just knowing where she was going from moment to moment?
Yeah, it became a lot of that, and this is a great question, because we had that conversation. Primarily, Victoria is a live theater actor and is accustomed to years and years and years of the automatic response that you get from an audience. And if you don't think that the audience is an active participant, then you're not paying attention, because they totally are. And that was something we talked about, the fact that we had to sort of conjure in our heads what we thought the appropriate reaction or the expected reaction would be from the audience, and build it in. And again, kudos to Vicki, because she was able to do that while working in a way that was really very kind of new and foreign to both of us.
There are two things that happen in this process too, that I've seen both times now in both the film productions. And that is that the actors need a little bit of time to get used to the camera. And in the first one, the camera was a voyeur and they didn't acknowledge the camera. However, in this one, Vicki, like we said, speaks to the camera as though it is the other participant in the play. And I could see the process. I could see her change as I was watching rehearsals. And at first it was Travis with his small camera just coming to rehearsal, and it was very awkward and very bizarre for her, and she didn't know where to look and where to focus, and Kyle had to help her figure all that out, and Travis did too, actually. But then when we got to the days of actually filming, I felt like she was very at ease, and she actually learned how to use the camera like it was that second character.
Yeah.
The other thing that I find stage actors really have a hard time at the beginning is with the silence that is in the room. During a play, you usually have other actors. Even if it's a one-person play, you have the audience responding, like Kyle just said, or just living, breathing, coughing. There's a lot of noise that we pick up as actors. But on a film set, we make it absolutely quiet so that the sound is not messed up in any way. So I always find that actors have a hard time at the very beginning of that process who are used to the stage, and there's something weird about being in a room that is that quiet.
Yeah. Just on that point, and for Travis and Mark, since we have you on the call this evening, how does it feel to be behind the camera, knowing that you are the closest people to the performer, and that you are, we'll say, like the first line of mediation, I don't know, between you and she? I just am curious what that would feel like.
I'll jump in real quick, Mark, and then I'll throw it to you. But because kind of off of what we were just saying, I think the one thing I have found from C-Marks to this was I wanted to be in there early enough that we could normalize some of the awkwardness up front, and the sooner the better. And almost when I was early on there, I was trying to be a little bit more disruptive than I needed to be in order to just to make her Vicki's and even Kyle and the whole team to feel like this is a normal part of the machine now, and I'll be here and I'll be in your face. I'll make steps. I might make noises. I might encourage you. I might distract you. And even when we were shooting, we would try to kind of overdo it right before we started so that it kind of broke the ice real wide, so that the next time, we got a little too close when we were setting up, and then we would back off and just always try to like de-escalate and de-arm and demystify, I think is the best, instead of letting this pressure build up of like, is the camera guy judging me? And I think that's what's super important about how you interact off of it, is like, the actor has to feel safe and feel like they can experiment or they can be wrong. And, in that moment, it's all about just keeping them feeling emotionally stable and safe, or if they need to feel provoked intentionally and they're comfortable with that, then you help set that up too. So that's the best I could do, is to be a trusting friend and ally to Vicki. Mark, I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Yeah, just kind of off of the question of being right there. It's always been my favorite thing, shooting films and shooting narratives, where you have an actor right in your face and you just feel like so privileged that you're able to take it in firsthand. This is a little bit different than a typical film. Because a typical film, the goal is always, you're there, they are there for the camera, and from step one, they are a film actor or actress, and you feel just so blessed, like, to be a conduit and like to be a part of bringing someone's amazing performance into into their TVs and their living rooms. Maybe even more so now, being in a theater, where this isn't really a normal medium for film. So just kind of lucky to be in that space and so close to an amazing, actress. But I'll also say early on, and I think this is for both C-Marks and here for Magical Thinking, is early on when the actors and actresses are really getting used to the camera. I think they all kind of have, or maybe I've just kind of thought this, but when they have a little bit of struggle, it's interesting because they're used to tons of people. What is Irish seat?
200.
Yeah, so they're used to 200 people, and I find it so funny that there's just like 10 of us in a room, and all of a sudden, like, oh my god, I can't do this. And there's something about a camera that is more invasive to people than just other humans. And I think it's because the idea that it's recorded and it lives forever, where if you just kind of mess up, no one really knows what happened or they forget about it. But there's something about it being recorded that I think it definitely takes a little bit extra for the actors and actresses to kind of get past that hurdle.
I think that's true what you said, and I love the way you have said all of this. But I think the other thing that is really something that the actor, and watching Vicky come to terms with it, the camera invades what is typically the actor's space. And during a play, no one is in that space except the actors. And now all of a sudden, there's equipment and a person who isn't an actor. And that's a real, even for me as the director, like outside that space looking in, it felt like, whoa, she's got to do that. And there's that big thing right there. And there's, somebody pushing things and somebody else writing things. And it is, even though it's not 200 people, it's invading that sort of sacred space of the stage in a way that stage actors are not accustomed to anybody but their own little tribe being within the confines of that space.
I agree with that, and also reinforce what you say, Mark. From an actor's point of view, it's just knowing it's in perpetuity, and for us stage actors, or for those of us who love the stage, it's the ephemeral nature of it, and just knowing that it vanishes into thin air, and to try anything because it's not going to exist. Even recording the 1 minute introduction to the Year of Magical Thinking can be nerve-wracking. It's just it's there forever. So I think it's all of it. And again, kudos to Vicky. She's just a consummate professional, just fighting through, because with C-Marks, there were two of them. They got to work with one another and shift focus and share it. But it's just one person. This is Vicky's third one-person show, so she's used to it in some regards. Do we have any other questions? Is there anything else that anyone would like to ask? Pop it into the chat box. Otherwise, it's clear, listening to Travis and Mark again, so validating or really just makes so much sense why you are our collaborators for these. We just love working with you all at Pan American. They have their own feature film, which is about to be released, called Mother's Day. So go and check their website, Pan American Film Division, or on their Facebook page, and check the journey of Mother's Day. And we just want to thank everybody for joining us this evening and for all of your support since last year, but certainly for these productions and moving forward. So please join us next Thursday and the Sunday after that for the rest of our talkbacks, and spread the word. How is the trust built between actor and crew to create the safe space for production? We had a lot of conversations about, there's the COVID piece, there's the material in the show, there's everything. So Greg, I'm going to hand it off to you again, because Greg is the liaison between the ICTC piece, the Pan American piece. And Greg, I know you spent a lot of time just making sure the space itself was safe in all of those regards. So is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I strapped a 5-gallon jug of Purell to my back, and I was always washing everyone down. In terms of, making a safe space for an actor to work, I think in the emotional realm, I feel like we all took really good care of the actor. Everybody involved was worried, not worried, but cognizant and careful to make sure that Victoria had everything she needed. Kyle would go up and talk to her softly about, think about this, think about that. Travis and I would confer. We would talk to Kyle, try to make Kyle the conduit whenever we could. Sometimes it was just easier if one of us would talk to her, but it was always with a lot of reverence towards what she needed to be able to do. So, and I think that was true with Mark and everyone else in the process. The makeup artist, the costumer, everybody. And my son was the dolly grip, the one pushing Travis around. And so we've all been around actors for a long time, whether it's in film or stage. And we know the piece, and we knew how hard this was to do, and repetitive times. You have to remember, we would do some scenes over again and again, or do the ending, and so we'd get a good tie into the next one. And everything was done, I think, so carefully and lovingly with Victoria. And I feel like that made it safe for her to be willing to go wherever she had to go.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, there's just a little addendum to the question, more from a psychological sense than a scientific. And Mom, I would say that so much of it was built out from the relationship between you and Vicky. You had that trust in the rehearsal room with the table work, and then going on this journey of this emotional content together.
Right. It's absolutely that. It's just what Greg was saying. And even from just a purely psychological point of view, that's my job as the director. It is, you don't ever get great work out of people if they don't feel safe. And so from the moment you approach the person about, casting them, putting them in the role, you have to start a very honest and open dialogue about what your expectations are and what their expectations can be. And it really is all about trust, and it's about safety. And if you're lucky enough to have that kind of a working relationship with someone, then you can be sure that that they're going to take chances, and they're going to take risks. And that's where the artistry happens. It's when somebody attempts something that may or may not succeed, but they do it because they feel safe. They're in a place where they feel safe. And I can't imagine that radiating out from me, just me sitting at the table with Vicky, to Michelle Eisen, our fabulous stage manager, who was there every moment of every step of every beat of the play. And then as more and more people got involved, it's just about maintaining that. And ultimately, I felt like we were absolutely blessed to have a team that everybody was pulling in the same direction, and that makes everybody feel safe, myself included. There was a lot I didn't know about. I didn't know about Travis's world and Greg's world, and they were the consummate teachers. And I learned so much from both of them to be able to do my part of the job. And they made me feel safe. They made me feel safe to start making decisions and try to think like a filmmaker when I'm a live theater director. So it was, that goes both ways. And the team was great for that. Just absolutely great.
There's one more element to that too, that people should understand, and that the context for how rehearsal and production, whether it's done in a stage or with a film, all comes down from the director. The director is the mother, the father, the drill sergeant, the loving whoever, shoulder to cry on. So all of that context that Kyle just gave and that we've talked about in how to make a safe space all begins with the director, and everyone else feels that context and then adapts to it and makes sure that they're part of what is being given to them through the director. So that's a big part of this. Plus, Now we've gotten to work with Pan American Film Division once before, and there's a reason why directors work with the same people all the time, because we trust them. And we and me as the producer, I trust them. And, because they show up with the right attitude and a lot of capability and intelligence and artistry. So, that also is felt in the room. And it's felt by the actor, who is the most important person in the room to feel every or anything that's going on around them. Because a toxic set will make for toxic acting.
Yeah.
And you don't want to watch that movie. Yeah.
No.
I just to say it really quick, like as you guys had all these awesome talks about trust. I mean, it's no different than it is in the real world. It's, you continue to be honest and vulnerable, and people will see that in you. And the more you deliver on things you promise or over deliver, I mean, all the normal things about trust. Are you being honest? And are you in it for the right reasons? I mean, the truth is always coming out. So if you've got some ulterior motive, people will know it. So I think it starts by getting your heart in the right place. And obviously this team always has that, and that's great. But there's no secret between theater or film or an office environment. It's just, are you being honest and delivering?
Yeah.
Well said.
So well said. We really appreciate everybody's time this evening. It always goes by super fast, and we look forward to next Thursday and then the Sunday after. Thanks to everybody and our sponsors and our patrons, everybody who's been there along the way for us. So have a beautiful rest of your evening and a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much. Enjoy the show if you haven't seen it yet, and please help us spread the word. Thanks, everybody. So long. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.